You're not gonna believe this. But I have tried 3 times to start this recording, and I keep getting phone calls or people at the door. And I haven't done a recording since I was teaching at ATS at college. And so it's hard enough to get back in the swing of things. But anyhow, the reason I'm making these recordings is we started a 5 session Bible study. I did it last year too, and we did the book of Daniel and eschatology. And we just had such a great outpouring of people who wanted to be in our Bible study groups, and I couldn't fit them all in the house. I didn't have a place to go elsewhere. And so I ended up traveling around to different towns. We ended up bringing some people in on Zoom. And, we had an equally great outpouring again this year. What we ended up doing was the men met with my husband out in the shop while we did a group of ladies here at the house. And then I promised the other folks that I would make recordings. Now, we didn't do recordings of the actual sessions with the ladies. However, I did take notes on some of their discussions and ideas and questions, and I'll share those with you. Throughout this 5 session that we'll do, I will also be showing some slides. I have some like videos from produced videos that I'll be sharing. And we'll just kind of break it up so you don't have to listen and look at me through the whole time, okay? We had a great time. We tried to stick with, 50 minutes to an hour. And I think that we did real well. So what we did was the lesser known women of the Bible. I had started out working on a book about a year ago. And then when I was asked to do some Bible studies again this year, I thought, let me pray about it. And I came across basically this group of women that I was working on. And I thought, I'm going to put that together for a study. So I encourage you, once we finish the sessions, that you share all that you learned from it with other people. Feel free. So this begins the 5 sessions of the lesser known women of the Bible. You might be asking yourself, why do we need to know about these women? They didn't even merit, some of them didn't, having their names mentioned in God's holy word. Each person we will study does have a message that they convey, and there is purpose. If it's written in God's word, there's a reason for it. And sometimes we overlook minor characters. We just focus on the major ones, like growing up, didn't we? We learned about Jonah and Moses and so forth, Father Abraham, and we overlook some of the minor characters. So we're going to draw out the meaning or the message that is found in regards to these ladies in the pages of history. There's always an application to what you read and how you transfer this from history to your life. I'll share with you some of our discussions we had. We're going to begin by looking today at women who were mentioned because of their roles. Roles like a mother, a wife, a servant. We're going to study their cultural background, the context of the scripture. We're going to pay attention to how the original language and the Western mindset can alter key thoughts of these lesser known women. In session 1, we began by just drawing a name from a box, and each participant was asked to read the description of the woman that they drew and don't reveal the name. And in most cases, the lady in the group guessed correctly the identity. It was a really good icebreaker. And what's interesting is that the ladies maybe didn't think we were going to talk about those particular women that we drew their names, like Naomi, Hannah. They were thinking Esther, Ruth, and Deborah. And so by the time we get to the end of the Bible study series, they were absolutely amazed at the ground we covered, even without dipping into those main characters that most of your book authors are writing about. So join me today as we spend time learning and finding application to the messages of the lesser known women of the Bible. Today's scriptures that we're going to cover are Genesis 16, verse 1. And I'll give you the scriptures again later on. Ruth, chapter 1 and verse 2. Samuel, chapter 1, verse 2. 2 Timothy, chapter 1, verse 5. And 2 Samuel, chapter 11 and verse 3. So this was one of the names that was in the box. Hagar, Hagar, Hagar. That's found in Genesis 16 and verse 1. She was an Egyptian slave and a maidservant to Sarah, the wife of Abraham. Sarah, Abraham. Okay. She was Sarah's maidservant. She didn't have much say, Hagar didn't, about anything, and especially not about becoming Abraham's wife. Though her status changed, she was still secondary to Sarah. Her son, which would have been Abraham's firstborn, was Ishmael. So I'm sure you've heard of Ishmael. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background and taking an in-depth look at Hagar. Genesis 16 and 1. Let me read that to you first. Now Sarai, Abraham's wife, bare him no children, and she had a handmaid, an Egyptian, whose name was Hagar. Verse 3 says, and Sarah, Abraham's wife, took Hagar, her maid, the Egyptian, after Abraham had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan, and gave her to her husband, Abram, to be his wife. So she gave her servant to Abraham. This practice is repeated later on when Jacob's wife Leah could no longer bear children. It's a cultural practice to use a servant as a surrogate, and it was seen as important for the women to bear heirs to the patriarch of the clan. So it was not uncommon that this sort of practice occurred culturally. Once Hagar became pregnant with Abraham's child, a rift developed between her and Sarah. Surprise. After receiving mistreatment from Sarah, Hagar is still pregnant with the child. She fled towards her homeland, but she met the angel of the Lord on the way, who told her, you got to go back. You've got to return to Sarah. He also promised her numerous descendants through her son Ishmael, and he did tell her she was to name him Ishmael. Now, let's take a look at Hagar is the mother of Ishmael, and she bore the first son to Father Abraham. She was going to run away. She didn't feel like she had any status, even though she was a wife to Abraham. Verse 8 tells us why she ran. Okay. And he said, Hagar, Sarah's maid, whence camest thou, and whither wilt thou go? And she said, I flee from the face of my mistress Sarai. Verse 5 says this, and Sarai said unto Abraham, my wrong be upon thee. I've given my maid into thy bosom. And when she saw that she had conceived, I was despised in her eyes. The Lord's judge between me and thee. Verse 6. But Abraham said to Sarai, behold, thy maid is in thy hand, do to her as it pleaseth thee. And when Sarai dealt hardly with her, she fled from her face. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, Return to thy mistress and submit thyself under her hands. Wow. So let's think about this. Hagar went back to the woman who dealt harshly with her, and Hagar submitted to her. How hard must that be? Because Sarah said that Hagar despised her. Now, pay attention to the fact that Hagar was given in marriage to Abraham. It wasn't a one-night stand. It was a marriage. Hagar thought she'd get to escape her misery the first time that she ran away, but God called her to return to it, and she obeyed. And he blessed her and her son, just as he promised he would. For her obedience and submission, Hagar was rewarded through her son Ishmael. So let's continue on to verse 11, chapter 16. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, Behold, thou art with child, and thou shalt bear a son, and shalt call his name Ishmael, because the Lord hath heard thy affliction. Wow. There's something really interesting here. While Hagar was Egyptian, a slave, God loved her. When she cried out to him, God answered. You know, there's this misconception that God will only answer the prayers of certain people. If you encounter someone who's suffering and they say, God wouldn't answer my prayer, you need to remember about Hagar. They should never assume the mindset of God. You know, I bring up Hagar because it's kind of relevant to the crisis in the Middle East. You know, as Christians, we fall short of knowing the generations and the conflict within the people there. And based on what you just read, we find that God gave great nations to both Isaac and Ishmael. Now, a question was asked. As you read about Abraham and Sarah and Hagar, along with their two sons, do you know that as you're reading that the names change from Abraham and Sarah? Have you ever thought about that? I know I would teach the children in Sunday school this because it's kind of going to be found throughout the entire Bible. And it begins right here where we see there's a covenant made with Abraham and Sarah. Their names were Abram and Sarai. And God, when he made that covenant, he wrote his name, Yah, into their names. Yah is God in Hebrew. And you will find that covenant and this arrangement in chapter 17. When he makes that covenant, there's that extra AH in the center of their names. That's kind of significant. Now let's move on to Hagar was given to Abram. And that covenant had not yet been made. So what is up with Hagar and her name? First off, this name is Arabic. It's possible that she was a runaway and she took refuge in Abraham's clan. We don't know. It's possible that she was given this name Hagar. The meaning of the name in Arabic is to flee. So is it possible that she's a runner? Whenever she faces adversity, she runs away. Thus, she ran away when Sarah and her got into a spat of some kind. Running from one bad situation to another. Do you know any people like that? How many times have you run into women who've had bad relationships and they only get into the frying pan again? They're runners. But this last time, when she had a really bad circumstances and she was running, the angel of the Lord appeared to her. And he said to her clearly that many things were going to happen in her favor. And she had to go back and she had to endure what was about to happen. So we hear about what's going to happen. Let's look at chapter 16 and verse 10. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, I will multiply thy seed exceedingly, that it shall not be numbered for multitude. Verse 20, and as for Ishmael, I have heard thee. Behold, I have blessed him, and will make him fruitful, and will multiply him exceedingly. 12 princes shall he begat, and I will make him a great nation. For her suffering and for her obedience and submission, Hagar was the mother of a son who ruled a great nation, a great people, with princes and castles and everything. His descendants are the modern day Arab people known specifically as the Bedouins. I do have more information. I'm not going to cover technically all of that, but by Genesis chapter 21, Sarah has now given birth to Isaac, and it was at this point that another conflict between the two wives happens. Now, Hagar had gone back and she had endured. She was not mistreated. It does not say that she was mistreated in any fashion, but in chapter 21 and verse 9, it says this, and Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, which she had borne unto Abraham, mocking. So the Hebrew word indicates that Ishmael was making fun of Isaac. He was laughing just in jest. Now it could be, just a simple thing that happens with children. Maybe Isaac fell down and Ishmael laughed at him. But it was just simply this. Sarah was indignant. And Hagar was still subservient to Sarah, and Sarah felt disrespect. And I would happen to say that she was probably jealous. So let's kind of roll that forward in application today. Let's look at stepchildren. Can you see how things can get out of hand if you encounter somebody who's in that situation and you begin to feel like there's differences being made between the children, or the wives encounter each other and talk to the man about the situation? Imagine what Abraham was going through, because he loved both the children. It's clear that he did. So we have a situation now where Hagar is sent away. She has to take Ishmael and leave the clan. So I just wanted to share with you this role of being a surrogate mother, being a runner, never facing adversity, having to go back and endure. So there's some reflection on what we've learned here today. One is endurance. And through your endurance and obedience and facing adversity, God can reward you. He may not reward you directly, but he might do it through your children. So there are promises that can come out of a bad situation. And most importantly, one of the things that somebody brought up was this lady, Hagar, was not your ordinary person to cry out to God. So she at some point believed in the God of Abraham, and he responded. If you know anyone today who has that attitude of God won't listen to me, I'm not like them, this story of Hagar, use it and apply it. Everybody's prayers are heard by God. Running away, closing people off is not going to solve anything. Rewards come with obedience, endurance. I want to make sure that you do understand. I don't believe that Sarai was a cruel taskmaster, or that she misused Hagar. And let's apply that today. If somebody is in an abusive situation, I'm not saying you have to tolerate abuse, so I want to make sure that's real clear. However, there might be a case of you're having to put up with an employer who's just not quite fair to you, or a parent or a pastor, somebody in an authoritative situation where you might just want to quit and walk away from. As long as God's directing you, endure, endure. You know, Hagar, man, she put up with a lot, and you know, she was rewarded for it. So that's that. Now we're gonna quickly do another person we talked about, and that person is somebody who had the role again of a mother. And we have sometimes secrets or shame involving our children. And there was a woman in the Bible that was in our little box. We pulled her name out. And she too had left or fled her country of Israel at the time. And she didn't want to go back because she had some secrets and some shame. So rather than talk about Ruth, we're going to talk about Naomi right now. Naomi and her family, if you don't know the story, they had fled to the country of Moab because of a famine that was in their land. Her husband, while there in Moab, died. She had two sons who had married Moabite women. Their names were Orpah and Ruth. And after 10 years, both of those sons passed away, and Naomi had heard that the Lord had blessed the land that she had come from and her people with food again. So she told her daughters-in-law that they could go back home and find new husbands. She wouldn't be beholden to them. And they both wept at Naomi's leaving, but there was one in particular who refused to leave Naomi's side. Orpah, she returned to her people, and Ruth didn't. And now we hear the famous words of Ruth in chapter 1, verse 16 through 17. Entreat me not to leave thee, or to return from following after thee. For whither thou goest, I will go, and whither thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God. That's important right there. Where thou diest will I die, and there will I be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also. But death part thee and me. And that's pretty strong. She loved Naomi, and she was willing to serve her God as well. Ruth was already kind of learning probably about Naomi's faith, even during this time of bitterness that they had been through. Naomi, she continued to watch out for Ruth, instruct her probably. And she really wanted her to go back, but how do you turn away somebody who is saying to you, I want to serve your Lord. I want to go to church with you. I want to be like you. You can't do that. See, here's the problem. Naomi left when things were bad. She left her kinsmen behind. She followed her husband into Moab. And then when things are good, she came back. Elimelech, that name says something. It tells us something about who those people were, Naomi and Elimelech. Melech in Hebrew means king. Take, for instance, a person who had money and means could leave a bad situation. If you were told that some kind of catastrophe was going to happen, you lived in New York City and you were in a poor situation, you don't have a car or anything, how are you going to get out of there? Well, the rich people left and during COVID and went down to Florida or wherever, you know. So they had to be of means, Naomi and Elimelech. They had to be of status. So that would be the equivalent person of fame today. Now, when that person falls out of grace, when the famous person who you've been following all along, let's just say a politician maybe, and they get in trouble and they fall out of grace, well, you know, the rats abandon the ship first. They're out, they're gone. Well, I'm done with you. I don't want anything to do with you anymore. But when things are good, they come back. So things really went bad in Israel with the famine, and they just slid on over to Moab. We looked at a map geographically at how close Moab really was to the land of Israel. It wasn't that far away. And, you know, when things got good, Naomi was ready to go back. You know, she didn't have anything promising going on in Moab, so she was ready to go back to her kinsmen. Now, let's look at this situation. What do we learn from Naomi's experience? When things went bad, she left her people. But she was afraid to go back with Ruth. Here's why. It would be obvious it was her daughter-in-law. And a good Jewish family marries within the clan. And the boys had married outside of the clan. Now, I don't know for certain Elimelech's role, but let's just assume that he had a leadership in the community, because when he goes back, he's got two relatives who have some ground and leadership. And I'll explain to you maybe some point later about who they were, Boaz and his family. But Elimelech had some power. Here we are dragging back a Moabitess. The boy had married outside of the clan. So that was shameful. That was a secret. And she couldn't hide what her boys had done in another land. So everything just seemed to be falling down around Naomi. But you know what she did? She sucked it up and she took Ruth with her, because who are we to turn away somebody from wanting to serve the Lord? So she put her tail between her legs and went back. And, you know, by doing this, she later becomes a matriarch of the future King David and the King of Kings down that lineage. So I want to just sum this up quickly by saying, has anybody ever said to you, I've got a family member that has an alternative lifestyle? Or my husband doesn't serve the Lord, but I'm ashamed to take you home with me because of what you might see or hear. You know, today that could just mean about anything, and I'm not going to go down those paths, but when you finally open up and confront and face these kinds of challenges, that's their choice. That's their lifestyle. That's not you. That's not representative of you. And in fact, in Naomi's case, I give her great kudos, because she was willing to bring in someone into the fold who was not of their culture, and she was willing to share the Lord and her life and her home with this woman. So she broke a lot of glass walls. And that's the one thing that we can say when somebody comes to you and say, I don't know what to do. And you can say, well, you know, we're Christ followers, and God can heal the pain and the past. There's scripture that says he'll bind up your wounds and heal the brokenhearted. We just need to simply love those and not hide and have secrets and shame, because truthfully, we've done all that we can do, and it's in the Lord's hand. I'll leave it at that. There was really not a whole lot of discussion amongst the group that I had in regards to this reflection of Naomi, other than don't hide your past. And, you know, that very day after that, I went to a women's meet and greet, And I'm not going to share with you the stories, but those women, at least a dozen, opened up and spoke about their past. And they were all situations of abuse, terrible things that I am not going to reveal or repeat. And I believe that healing began that day when they opened up unexpectedly and talked about what they had endured. And the Lord will heal their past and work with them. And there were mothers there that I know, just being the parent in a situation like that and discovery later, it just eats you up inside, and they may never really get over that. So only the Lord can help them through that. And we'll leave it there. Okay, last person, Hannah, I think. Let me look at my notes here. Yeah, Hannah. Well, you know what? I've got two people, but we'll see where the time's at. Here, I'll look. Just a second. Okay. Yeah, let's do Hannah. That one was pretty short anyhow. It's in 1 Samuel chapter 1, verse 5 through verse 8. And let's do a little backdrop of that. Samuel is the last prophet in the Bible, and before King David, and the kingships began for Israel. Hannah was the mother, again, another mother of Samuel. Hannah was married to a man who loved her very much. He also had another wife, and that wife was able to bear him children. And as I said, culturally, when a woman can't bear children, they look for the fault, like, what's she doing wrong? What sin did she commit? Why she can't? They just felt life wasn't worth living if they were childless. So Hannah's husband, he kept saying to her, he said, Hannah, I give you more allowance than the other wife. I love you. But the rival wife, again, here we go, she provoked Hannah continually. So Hannah said, don't I mean more to her husband said, don't I mean more to you than 10 sons? And they would go up to the temple to pray and offer sacrifice. And Eli would have been the prophet at that time. And she went up and she just wept bitterly, and she vowed a vow to the Lord. She said, if you will look on my affliction, and if you will not forget me and give me a man child, I will give him to you all the days of his life, and there shall be no razor come upon his head. That means that she would dedicate him to the temple, to temple work, and she'd raise him to become a Nazirite, which would be a priest in the priesthood. So it's not that she was offering a sacrifice, but she promised the Lord, let me just please have a child. Well, her lips were moving, but nothing was coming out. And Eli saw that. And of course, that's that famous line of, woman, put away your wine. And she said, oh no, Lord, you don't understand what I'm saying here. And she explained the situation. And he says, okay. He says, well, then I tell you what, you will have a child in a year's time when you come back. And sure enough, she did. And she did exactly what she had promised. She dedicated the child after she weaned him, the child Samuel, took him to the temple to serve. She saw him every year. It's not like, it's like you send your kid away to boarding school. Okay. He did grow up in service of the temple, and she was so excited. There's a beautiful prayer that she gives the thanksgiving to the Lord, and the Lord blessed her with many more children. And as a result, we learn about sacrifices, and we learn obedience again, and trusting and having faith that when we hear something from the Lord, that he said through the prophet Eli, he says in a year's time, she trusted that and she carried out her vow that she had made. So there we have it. I brought up 2 Timothy chapter 1 and verse 5 with a mother-grandmother situation. They were in the box, Lois and Eunice. I wanted somebody from the New Testament to be mentioned and the roles. They were the mother and grandmother of Timothy. Timothy, as you know, has 2 books in the New Testament of the Bible, and he accompanied Paul the Apostle. Paul was his mentor, and he loved him a great deal. It was like a father to Timothy. Now, here's the story. Timothy's father was a Greek, the Bible says, and his mother was Jewish. She was of a different faith. They were unequally yoked. And obviously her mother was Jewish, okay? So Paul had gotten to know and mentioned them only, I think only one time in the Bible are they mentioned. And he talks about what a wonderful Christians they are. So the reflection and application that we made with this was, not being equally yoked can yield a lot of differences of opinion in different areas of life, especially in your household. Some of it can involve moral conduct. So you got to be an influence wherever you can be an influence. And the thing that was a secret ingredient or key thing here was Paul, as an apostle, he mentored Timothy. So, you can either have a blood relative or somebody from church. If you're unequally yoked and you're concerned about your children, finding and surrounding them with the fellowship and love of your church people can be influential. Spiritual brothers and sisters of the Almighty Father is what I say. Paul did teach Timothy. The women taught him at home. They taught him, about that Proverbs 22 section about what is a good woman and a good wife. He learned well from the home front. There was no bickering because they were unequally yoked. There was no disrespect mentioned in the Bible. So he understood what it was to come from a godly home. All right. I don't know that I'll cover Elizabeth at this time. I don't want the video to be overwhelming to you. I know next time what we're going to talk about is the bad girls of the Bible. So I have what we read here as we pulled the names out of the box. Let me read to you about Elizabeth just so you've got some scripture to go with. Elizabeth is found in Luke 1, verse 5. She was married to the priest named Zechariah, and she was a cousin to Jesus's mother Mary. She was in her old age, once again, childless. People thought maybe sin had prevented Elizabeth from bearing a child. And in her culture, that would have been very hard to face, especially being the wife of a priest. But she was visited by the angel of the Lord, and she was told that she would give birth to John the Baptist, cousin to Jesus. Okay. So we'll let it go this time. And thank you for joining me. I'll try and get the next recording up and running. We'll watch a video in that one. They'll be about 12 minutes long. Thank you and God bless you.